This is an XPO virtual Skillshare. What I'm doing today is an introduction to beekeeping. My name's Colin Johnston. The first thing I want to look at is the equipment you're going to need to start off with bees. And you can see here in front of me I've got a hive. There are a number of different types of hive used in Ireland. This one is probably the most common. It's called a British National Hive, and it comes in different sections. So I'm going to run through the sections and show you what each of them does. The first part of the hive is the floor. Now traditionally hives used to always have a solid floor. People thought it was good to keep them warm and cosy, keep breezes out. But we now know from experiment that a mesh floor is almost always the best choice. The mesh floor does a few different things. It stops humid conditions from building up in the hive, which can lead to fungal disease. It also is a very useful protection against parasitic mites. We have a big problem with varroa mite in all of Europe now. It's spread from Asia. The varroa mite is a parasitic mite that gives the bees a lot of grief, but it has the habit of dropping off its host from time to time, and if you have a mesh floor, quite a lot of the mites will just fall through the floor and not get back into the hive again. So if you get an old hive from somewhere, you should replace the floor with a mesh floor. They're the better job. The next thing up from the floor is this deep box. And this deep box is called the brood chamber. And this is where the queen lives and where she lays eggs and rears the brood, the young bees. You'll also find honey and pollen and so on stored in there. Now, the boxes in a modern hive, let's have a look at how they work. Inside the box there is a range of frames. You can see the top bars of the frames there. And the frames, these are a way of allowing the bees to build in their natural pattern but make the combs inspectable and removable. In a wild colony, the bees will make their honeycombs spaced apart, parallel, but you obviously can't go in there and take one out and look at it or replace it with another one. So over the years, a system has developed where you have removable frames. Here's a removable frame. This is a deep one because it's out of the brood box, and you can see it's a light wooden frame, and in the middle of it we have what's called wax foundation. And this is really, it's a way of giving the bees a head start with building their comb and telling them where to put it. So it's a thin sheet of wax with a honeycomb pattern embossed on it, and very often reinforced with very thin wires that just is to strengthen it. So in this national hive brood box, it will take up to 12 frames. If you squeeze them in tightly, you'll get 12 in there. I usually use 11 so that there's a little bit more space, a little bit more wriggle room. 10 to 12 is the usual number of frames that you'll put into a box like that. The deep ones are specially designed for the brood chamber. They produce a large frame. We're not going to generally be taking these away and extracting honey from them. These are for the queen to lay eggs in and to raise bees. So that's the brood chamber. The next thing that we normally have in a hive is a queen excluder, and it's just a kind of a grill that stops the queen from going up into the upper boxes. That means she can't lay eggs and produce larvae in the upper boxes. You'll just get honey and bee bread, which is a mixture of honey and pollen in the upper boxes. So here's a queen excluder. They come in different forms. Usually nowadays they're simple plastic pressing or sheet metal. This is one that I've kind of repaired, put a damaged queen excluder into a plywood frame, and that's going to go on top there, so that would keep my queen working in the lower box. The next box that goes on is a shallow box, And these are usually called honey supers. Super because it's above, and honey because that's where you want the bees to put the honey. Now again, 10 to 12 frames go into one of these in a national hive. I don't have the full complement of frames. You can see they're a shallower frame, but otherwise they're very similar to the brood chamber frames. So that's a new frame. These come flat pack, and you just pop them together, put a little tack in here and there, and put in the sheets of foundation. And when the bees get at them, then they will build them out to make the honeycomb. There's one that they've worked till they've filled out, it's a bit dusty, they've filled out the cells, and you get a more substantial honeycomb structure. And that's where they will put their honey, and in the lower box it's where they will raise their young, the larvae. So the way that it works is, generally speaking, the queen is left pretty much alone down there, not alone, with lots of other bees. She's undisturbed to a large extent in the brood chamber, and she is producing bees, and the worker bees are feeding the larvae and sealing them when they're almost mature, generally speaking, looking after them. Whereas the upper boxes, the ones above the brood chamber, are used to store food, and especially honey, and those are the ones that we're interested in from the point of view of honey production. Above the honey super, now you can have one honey super, 2, 3, it depends on what kind of honey production you're getting. The general rule is that when one honey super is 3/4 full or 2/3 full of honey, then you put on a new one so that they'll have more space to move into. At the top of your stack of boxes then you have a crown board. This is slightly more elaborate than a normal crown board, but I'm short of crown boards at the moment. Crown board is an inner lid, and above the inner lid is the roof of the hive, which goes on like that. Now, you can buy a starter's kit. It's probably not a bad way to go. You can buy a flat pack hive, which will come with the floor, brood chamber, 2 supers, a queen excluder, a crown board, and a roof. All the frames and all the wax foundation to fit that out. And if you want to operate that way, you can buy a complete kit which will include your hive. It will include one of these, which is a smoker. We puff smoke on the bees to keep them mellow, and it's a very effective tool for mood management in your bees. This is a simple can and bellows affair, and usually people use different things in the smokers. I usually use a rolled up corrugated cardboard like that. I just have a little wood screw twisted into it to hold it together. You light one end, and when it's going well, you pop it into the smoker, puff away, and that'll keep smoking for 3/4 of an hour or something like that while you're working at your hives. And you don't nuke the bees with smoke, but you puff in a bit before you start working, and you puff in a bit more at intervals, and it produces a feeding reflex in the bees. They fill their stomachs with honey and they get really chilled and mellow, so that's what you want when you're working with them. So in your kit you'll get the hive, you get the smoker, you will get a hive tool of some kind. There are different patterns of hive tool. They're a tool that's used for prising, scraping, lifting, different operations like that. Different beekeepers favour different types of tool. This is a cheap one, works fine. You will also need probably a soft brush for gently removing bees from frames, from your clothes, from whatever. It's a way of moving bees around without annoying them too much. And you'll want a bee suit, veil and gloves. Now, let's have a look at these. Here's a pair of beekeeper's gloves. They're a soft leather glove with a long gauntlet which covers the sleeve of the bee suit. And there's a number of different patterns of bee suit. You can have a simple white overalls with a hat and veil that comes down over your shoulders. I got this recently. It's a lightweight synthetic bee suit, and it has the built-in veil, and you'll see me in that shortly when we go into the hives. It's important, I think it's important to have good protection. It's not necessarily that the bees are always going to be attacking you, but you have a better frame of mind if you feel confident that you are protected against the bees. And West of Ireland bees, they're mostly black bees. It's the native variety of honeybee, or they're a hybrid between the native variety and something else, and they can be slightly cross at times, let's say a little bit unpredictable. So if they do get annoyed, you want to make sure that you are not in the firing line. Some beekeepers work without gloves. You can do that if you're a very cool and calm person and you're not taking much risk, because a sting on the hands isn't a big deal. I would say always use a veil when you're going in working with bees or even going close to a hive, because stings on the face are not a good thing. Stings around the eyes could be quite serious. So just protect yourself properly and you'll feel that bit calmer and more confident. So that kit now, if you're buying a hive, the basic tools, the gloves and the bee suit, you're probably talking about €350, something like that. This hive is actually a cedarwood hive, which would be more expensive. And that's buying everything flat pack so that you assemble them yourself. There's not much carpentry in it. It's just like it's like an IKEA type job. You just put it together, a few little tacks, etc. If you are a carpenter or have those kind of skills, you could build all the boxes yourself. I have built hives and boxes, and you just have to look at the prices and decide whether it's a good trade-off to spend the time making them yourself, or whether you're just as well to buy the cheaper flat pack versions and put them together. Okay, that's the end of part one, where I'm talking about the kit you need, and the next thing I'll be doing is actually looking at the hive, what goes on in the hive.